This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. It's a show full of laughs for 2022, and that begins with our last grain market update for the year with K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. He shares where he sees profitability going for producers and reflects on fertilizer prices as we go into the new year. Also ahead, Earl Lewis, Chief Engineer for the Kansas Department of Agriculture, joins us to share information about multi-year flex accounts, which allows for producers to be a bit more flexible with their water usage. Also, Ron Wilson, director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development, joins us for a festive Kansas profile featuring a unique family vineyard and winery. We end with this year's final agricultural weather report from K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. He shares this past week was a unique one with parts of the state receiving precipitation and even some surprising thunderstorms. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are starting today's show with Dan O'Brien. He is our K-State grain economist for our grain market update for the week. And Dan, believe it or not, but this is our last one for 2022.
It's been a raucous year. I think the Ukraine-Russia war caused a tremendous amount of worry that we really saw in the spring and gave us such tremendously high prices. We've come down off of some of those highs. As I don't know that there's any less risk coming out of that situation, but at least there's not as much outright panic in the markets. They've kind of grown accustomed to the volatility of it all, apparently. And, of course, there's been the UN-brokered trade corridor situation that's worked out. I find it interesting that they still have problems back and forth on that and just not anything solved by any stretch, but at least it's not quite so frontal of a panicky response on the world's part. And all the supply chain issues throughout the year, that certainly affected us. We saw that in the fertilizer market. We'll talk about that a little bit more later here today. Then for us in Kansas and on into the western Corn Belt, we certainly had dry conditions, and we saw that front and center on our wheat crop, and that's still a factor now, heading off into not just the 2022 crop, but what our expectations might be for the 2023. It seems to be the new normal is that, man, everything's up in the air. So we find ourselves on yesterday's close with May 2023 corn closing at $6.53 and a quarter, and we're not shocked by that. It's $6.53. That's sideways to lower from where we were this year. Back when we were at $4.50 to $5, that this would have been a panacea, but not quite. And I would say that trend of late, actually a little bit of an uptrend for that March contract. Over the last 2 to 3 weeks, we had gotten down to about 6.30 or so. We're kind of in the mode of waiting to see what happens. It'll be really interesting to see after the first of the year. Kansas hard red winter wheat futures, the March contract closed at 8.60 and a half yesterday. And of course, if you're a wheat market watcher, they had seen prices over $10 earlier on this year. So 8.60 for them, probably given, I guess, the benchmark price in our minds of over 10, a lot of wheat that's not sold already is probably being held. But again, just like for corn, we've had a little bit of an uptrend. It had gotten down to about 8.25, so close at 8.60 or so, and we'll see where that goes. Soybeans closed yesterday, the January contract at 14.73, and that's been the strongest of these three major contracts that we're watching in Kansas. Again, January 23 had been down by $14 about mid-November and has been generally trending, generally upward to where we're at right now. And, you know, we try to watch the relative strength indexes on these, a little bit of a technical input just to see how the markets judge themselves, if they're trending up. And for corn futures right now, the relative strength index for the daily prices about 45 to 50 on a range of 0 to 100. So about in the middle. Wheat, almost exactly the same number, again, about 40 to 45. For soybeans, more like 55 to 60. So just like we talked about, generally some more positiveness for beans. I think dry weather in Argentina and export enhancement program that they got going, still developmental phase for the crop in Brazil. Lots of optimism, although you do see some dry reports, so that's sort of unknown. So overall, you stand back and look at the markets, and we're doing, quote, okay, nothing really volatile at the moment. And when will the next set of volatility factors come? And what weather for us could come into play out once we get past the first year, head through January, February, then on into planting season. And from there, then the worries of the market start to pick up.
Absolutely. And Have we seen any of this reflected or play out in our cash markets locally? I mean, we're kind of in a lull right now, or we have been. Has that been the trend this past week as well?
Well, Kansas cash corn markets, the spot price, very, very positive basis levels. The strongest one in general around a community that we watch, the Garden City area, about $1.35 over. But a lot of strength in Colby, about $1.06 over. 788 cash in Garden City, $7.59 in Colby, $7.53 at the top bid, $1 over down in Columbus in the southeast corner of the state. So there's a lot going on in that southeast corner. Some demand pull from out of state. Otherwise, Hutchinson 89 over, Salina at 81 over, Topeka 62. So all doing decently. Kind of the time of year to look at cost of production too, and we're comparing that to the forward contract bids. So for corn forward contract bids in the Colby area, you have about a 573 forward contract bid, 633 in Garden City, and both of those are still making money based on our KSU budgets. We show a cost of production estimate early on of 567. That's covering all costs. So we're projected to make some $30, $40 an acre over that. That's at about 89, 90 bushels, so better than that, we make more money. And for the Garden City area, about 583. And again, we've got 633, 583 break even, 633 for a forward contract bid. So there's money there. Look to north central Kansas, you have break evens. Estimate about 468 in north central, 339 given their cost structure. It seems low, but that's how we calculate it, given the higher yields in south central Kansas. And of course, forward contract bids in Salina and Hutchinson, 578, 598. You look to the eastern third of the state, and you've got break-even costs about, again, to the north, about 508 in northeast Kansas, about 363 again in southeast. That southeast, south central Kansas has pretty good cost structure for corn by our estimates. And the forward contract bids in Topeka area, 568, also 568 in Columbus. So money to be made there. So we stand here right now, and if we can just get enough fertilizer and other seed into the ground, it looks like for the corn enterprise that heading off into 2023, that at least as we stand right now, we're anticipating we'll be able to make some money. Again, the issue will be whether we have dry conditions or not as opposed to normal. And we have just a little bit of info. It does seem like there's more of a neutral outlook for La Nina and El Nino, which is better than saying, hey, we're just going to continue with La Nina and dry. So prospects of a decent year with okay yields at least are brightening a little bit. You asked on the other crops, and again, grain sorghum is still positive basis all across the state. Strongest in Garden City and Topeka and in Colby, 40, 50 cents. Hutchinson, 64 over. Pretty strong almost everywhere. Soybean cash bids over $15, top bids in Topeka and in Hutchinson. Everything else over 14, 14 and a half, so all pretty good. For wheat, no doubt, as we had talked about earlier, if there's one price where we kind of have what we call cognitive dissonance, that, if we were just looking at these prices, we'd say they're wonderful prices. If we look at where we were 2 months ago, we're disappointed. But cash prices across the state, Colby 825, Salina 855, Topeka 835, 830 in Garden City, 845 Hutchinson, Columbus 838. So very good prices, but about $1.50 to $2 lower than where we were earlier in the year, and that's what we're still remembering.
Some good news profitability-wise there, Dan, coming from the estimates that the Ag Econ department here at K-State has put together, so that's always good to hear. And of course, I think we'd rather take 50-50 odds on La Nina returning than what we have seen in the past, so optimism there as well. And of course, great prices, all things considered, in terms of wheat and other crops going on here in Kansas locally, but we were a bit spoiled earlier this year.
Well, and those expectations were born of hopes of financial success, so that you're getting down to family living costs and all of that you were hoping would be better covered than not. So I sure understand why, but it's early. I think for the wheat market, so much is going to hinge on what we have coming through the winter, but especially late February, early March. Will we have moisture for that crop to come up or not? And if it doesn't, then I would wonder about old crop sales, what we still have in storage, gaining value as well as any new crop bids that we'd have. So that's probably what's in the mind of a lot of people as they look at the wheat market.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully whenever we return come January, we'll have more secure outlooks in that regards when it comes to our weather forecasts and things of that nature. But you hinted at this a moment earlier, and it's fertilizer has become a big input price concern. And a recent fertilizer report was released, so let's discuss that.
Yes, on probably the one fertilizer report that the USDA puts out. It's a survey from the state of Illinois. It's an Illinois production cost report, and really for that, they're looking at fertilizer and a little bit of diesel prices. The prices that they're showing on that are thought-provoking. They're not that different from last year, but now we're attuned to them. It's not quite so shocking. Anhydrous ammonia, average $1,419 basically per ton there. Urea, 4600. 819 per ton, liquid nitrogen 2800, 639, diammonium and monoammonium phosphate, again 1846 1152. They're both at about 954 per ton, and then potash 866 per ton. So when you look at the trends, you still see the strong uptrend that occurred in 2022 in the nitrogen fertilizer side. Come off those highs some. For DAP prices, you see, kind of look at what historic patterns have been. In January, we were up at over $1,000 a ton, and we're down now to about 940, but that's still higher than anything we'd seen in several years previous. So we've now kind of dialed in these prices, and I know our budget costs. If there was a time when we talked about those break-evens, and people would have fainted, but now with the inflation in not just fertilizer, but the other inputs too, this is where we're at in terms of production costs.
Dan, I can't thank you enough for this update, but also all of the other updates you've provided throughout 2022.
Well, thank you, and we really appreciate the work that you've done also, Samantha.
That's a kind word to end our grain market updates with for the year. So, Dan, thank you so much again.
Thanks, Samantha. Take care.
Absolutely. Once again, that was K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien joining us for our last grain market update for the year. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now with Earl Lewis. He's a chief engineer with the Kansas Department of Agriculture, and he's joining us today for a conversation on water usage and the tools available to help with maybe the overusage that you've experienced this year, for those of you tuning in. So, Earl, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity to be on.
Absolutely. Well, we're grateful that you came in today. And like we mentioned, there's annual limits in place in Kansas in terms of water usage. And in years like this year, we've experienced prolonged drought. That's a bit challenging.
Absolutely. It is time to start thinking about how much water has been used on a water right. And we do work on a calendar year basis when it comes to water use. And as you said, everybody knows it's been a pretty challenging year drought-wise. And again, this isn't rocket science. When we have really dry conditions, that means folks can use a little more water than they would on average. And so that's something that I think we all need to be keeping our eye on and really going out and having a look at that water meter if you haven't yet and seeing how much water has been used, and then maybe take a look and see how does that compare to your water right and whether you are still in compliance with the limits of your water right, or whether maybe you've had a little trouble with that this year.
Sure. And we were speaking beforehand, and I think you said, in a typical year, most people don't think about how much water they've used until a little bit closer to March, because that's when that information's due. But this year, we need to be thinking maybe way beforehand.
Yeah, it is. And you're right, because by law, the water use reports are supposed to be into our office by March 1st. And so we do have a lot of folks that just human nature, you're going to look in January or February when you're filling out that report. But when we have a challenging year like this, and maybe we've got a little more water use, we'd encourage folks to go out and look at that meter and check now, because we do have the opportunity, if you've overpumped, especially if you're a groundwater user, if you have overpumped that water right, we have a tool called the multi-year flex account that might be able to keep you in compliance. And what it really does is instead of having an annual limit to your water right, we have a 5-year allocation. And so you can overpump that water right in any given year and kind of borrow from future years. We try and make sure we don't increase the overall draw on the aquifer over that 4 or 5 year period. But our goal is to really give folks flexibility and to keep folks in compliance. The key here is, by law, that the application for that multi-year flex account has to be submitted by December 31st. each year. So it does create a little bit of a pinch there for folks that are normally going out and looking in February at their meter before they turn your water use report in. To do that this year and find out you've overpumped, well, you're a little too late by what the statute says we can accept for that multi-year flex count, which then puts you into the penalty phase, and we obviously would like to avoid that if possible.
Yeah, not fun for anybody involved in cases like that. So key to get out there maybe now before the holidays even hit and take a look at it and decide whether or not you want to sign up for the multi-year flex plan. And sign-ups for that, what does that process look like for a producer?
Yeah, so the key really is, like you say, finding out if you overpumped, and then if we think that that's something you need to look into, get a hold of one of our field offices in Stockton or Stafford, Garden City or Topeka, or of course our headquarters in Manhattan. They can run the calculations for you and see how you fit. If that's something you think you want to look at, then there's an application and a fee that goes along with it, processing fee that's set by statute. And again, our goal really is to try and make sure folks are in compliance and make sure we don't have that big impact on the aquifer.
So when it comes to considerations for applying for a multi-year flex plan, is there some people that you consider a better candidate maybe than others when it comes to applying?
Well, there are a few places where it's not allowed. If you're in a few of the intensive groundwater use control areas, or if you're in that last year of a local enhanced management area. But by and large, if your water right is in good standing and you get in before December 31st, it's something we can entertain as far as trying to get that application submitted and hopefully approved.
Absolutely. Well, here's hoping that those that have to apply this year, we get a good amount of precipitation in the year to come. I know that, the La Nina weather pattern, hopefully it doesn't persist for year 4, but we'll see, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're looking for that pattern to break here. I think all of us are. It's really been really dry across the western part of the state in particular, but all over the state now.
A lot of places in extreme drought in this case, and the western side of the state and south as well. So here's hoping that we get that precipitation that we've been hoping for, and that this isn't even an issue that we have to think about in the coming year. So
absolutely. Well, that's why the multi-year flex count is built the way it is, right? You get a 5-year period, and you expect to get some dry years, you expect to get some wet years, and then gives the producer an opportunity to plan and really make sure the crop has the water it needs during those dry years, but then make sure the farmer can plan for those more normal or wet years and maybe change what they're doing a little bit, but again, still stay within that overall limit.
Absolutely. And you've hinted at this quite a bit during our conversation, but the aquifer, preserving it is really the goal of this, right?
Well, I would say that the way that we do the calculation makes sure that we aren't causing more of an impact to the aquifer than would normally have happened, but the pattern in which we use that water may change a little bit. We aren't using this as a conservation tool per se, it's a flexibility tool, but certainly thinking about the overall health of the aquifer is something we all ought to be doing as we plan for the future.
Absolutely. Some new checks to check those levels, water levels in the aquifer coming in January. We were chatting beforehand. So looking forward to hopefully seeing that it wasn't too impactful, but we'll see soon, right?
We will see. Yeah, each year the Kansas Geological Survey along with the Department of Agriculture go out and measure a little over 1,400 wells, typically in the first or second week in January, and then compare those measurements over time. And yeah, it's, again, pretty typical when we see dry conditions, folks pump more. That means there's going to be more declines in the aquifers where we've got the ongoing, decline situation. And so we are expecting we'll see greater than average declines. We don't know how much until we get out there and actually put the tape down the well and measure it. But yeah, it's something we're going to be keeping an eye on here in just a few weeks.
Earl, I can't thank you enough for coming in today, taking the time out of your busy day to stop over here at Kansas State and join us for this conversation. So I appreciate it.
Always happy to. Thanks for the opportunity, Samantha.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Chief Engineer with the Kansas Department of Agriculture, Earl Lewis, joining us for a conversation on water usage and tools available, such as the multi-year flex plan with KDA. Now we're joined for a special festive edition of Kansas Profile from Ron Wilson, Director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development.
This is Kansas Profile. I'm Ron Wilson, Director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development at Kansas State University. It's the Festival of Lights. Twinkly lights adorn 5 acres of trees, barns, and buildings as excited families enjoy hot chocolate and homemade spiced wine. It's an annual Christmas celebration hosted by a family-owned winery on the high plains of rural Kansas. This is a special holiday edition of Kansas Profile. Kirk and Treva Johnston are the owners and founders of Shiloh Vineyard and Winery near Waukene, Kansas. The vineyard hosts special events throughout the year, including the week-long Festival of Lights during the week before Christmas. Kirk Johnston grew up at Goodland. His wife Treva is originally from DeMar. Kirk was always interested in farming. He grew up helping his uncle on the farm and earned a degree in agronomy from K-State. I took lots of chemistry classes, Kirk said. Kirk and Treva married and eventually ended up on his grandfather's place near Waukene. My grandfather bought this place in 1921 because it had a horse barn on it, Kirk said. They built a chicken house and by 1925 had 300 layers in it, he said. In 1929, they added the family home. It was a house ordered out of the Montgomery Ward catalog, Kirk said. When Kirk and Treva got the property decades later, they considered their options. We wanted to farm, but diversification seemed like a good idea compared to spending millions of dollars for new farm equipment, Kirk said. Instead of buying big farm equipment, they put in a vineyard. They installed a drip irrigation system. We planted our first grapes in 2008, Kirk said. Ultimately, this became a commercial winery. I read everything I could and went to a lot of conferences, Kirk said. He learned from other commercial operators as well. We were assistant pastors at a local church in Hayes and felt called to make an overseas trip, Kirk said. Kirk and Treva went to a vineyard in Shiloh, Israel, to help trim the vineyard and prune their vines. It was a powerful experience for them. If you let God direct your paths, His peace will come in, Kirk said. We want to provide top-quality service so that people can experience that peace here in western Kansas, he said. Today, Shiloh Vineyard and Winery offers a variety of premium wines made from their own fruit. This includes dry whites, dry reds, semi-sweet white, fruit, and dessert wines. We started with 350 gallons in our first year, Kirk said. In 2021, we produced 1,000 cases at 2.5 gallons per case, he said. They've upgraded their facilities and renovated the chicken house barn and 100-year-old granary. In 2020, Treva's niece Kim and her husband Chris Heike relocated from California to Waukene to help with the business. Shiloh Vineyard and Winery also hosts special events, lots of weddings and visitors throughout the year. In addition to the nightly Festival of Lights during the week before Christmas, they offer a Sip of Summer patio party, fall festival dinner, and much more. 3 times a year, they host 5-course meals paired with their wines. The Johnsons also offer recreational vehicle dry camping sites at the vineyard. They connected with a national website called Harvest Hosts, which promotes RV camping at farms, breweries, wineries, and more across the country. This website has brought in lots of visitors. It's been so wonderful, Kirk said. People say this is an oasis. They've had guests from every state in the U.S., plus Brazil, China, Peru, Germany, Australia, and more. Shiloh wines are available at a variety of retail outlets in western Kansas, as well as at the vineyard itself. The vineyard is located out in the country between Waukene and the rural community of Collier, population 97 people. Now that's rural. For more information, go to www.shilohvineyard.com. It's time to leave the Festival of Lights, one of several events which bring guests to the Shiloh Vineyard and Winery. We commend Kirk and Treva Johnston for making a difference with grape and wine production and lots of great hospitality on the High Plains. They are helping bring happiness to light. Wishing you happy holidays for the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development, this is Ron Wilson with Kansas Profile.
Thanks, Ron, for that festive story. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are ending our programming this week, as always, with our agricultural weather report. And joining us for that, as always, is K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. So, Chip, thanks for being here today.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, this past week was quite eventful weather-wise. Let's talk through some of it.
Yeah, so we kind of started out cool, and then we gradually warmed up. And we had a ton of moisture that was out ahead of this impactful storm system, and as a result we had lots of cloud cover, not huge temperature swings, but just cool enough to make it feel like late fall and early winter. And it definitely felt like that with fog around most of the mornings, and then when that fog lifted, we still kept the stratus deck and didn't really see the sun for about 3 or 4 days. And we had a beautiful morning. What was that? It was Sunday morning. This rime ice was everywhere across northern Kansas. Everything was white. The temperatures were below freezing, but we had fog still. So just beautiful weather on Saturday when the fog finally lifted, and then we brought in that strong cold front on Monday that dropped temperatures after a brief warm-up just ahead of it, dropped temperatures and brought some very much-needed moisture.
Absolutely, and some of that resulted in some snow, maybe not in our neck of the woods, but other parts, right?
Yeah, parts of northwest Kansas got some snow. And honestly, it's hard to tell how much snow they got because they had so much wind associated with it. But the main corridor snow went north into Nebraska, and most of Kansas got a drink except for far west Kansas along that Colorado border. They, once again, missed out. But for central and eastern Kansas, they did well with half inch to over an inch in some places, and even thunderstorms. I'll tell you, we don't talk about thunderstorms very often in December in Kansas. We had a tornado warning down in southwest Kansas, but even Manhattan area saw thunder and lightning, and we just don't see a whole lot of that. If we look at observations over the last 30 years, only about 20 days have reported lightning in December at Manhattan Airport. So not a common phenomenon in December, and definitely a sign of just how strong and potent that storm system was, with lots of cold air aloft that helped lead to some pretty strong instability in thunderstorm activity.
Sure. So a unique week for sure. And going into the week ahead, I think we're expecting temperatures to drop even more, right?
Yeah, we had that cold front come through. It's brought some strong gusty winds that we're going to keep into Saturday before they start to weaken. And the cold air is here, and it's here to stay. We've had that building cold air up in the northwest part of the U.S. and in the western Canada, and now the door's been opened up, and that air is just streaming southward, and we're getting a lot of wind and cold temperatures associated with that. As we move forward, the forecast is for that cold air to keep moving southeastward with another system here by the weekend and into early next week. And as a result, that's going to usher in much, much colder air. In fact, it looks like the couple of days before Christmas, we're going to be really cold. We might not see temperatures reach the 20-degree mark. Our average temperatures across Kansas in that low 40-degree range to the low 20s. So we're talking 10, 20 degrees below normal cold.
Absolutely. And I know some new outlooks were released recently for January and the months ahead in 2023. What did those show?
Yeah, I really want to focus these outlooks, the fact that we've kind of underestimated the amount of cold air that we're seeing. And these outlooks kind of, I think, continue to do that. We have equal chances of above, below, or normal temperatures into January, and then persisting even in through March. Precipitation-wise, a little more certainty on that, and we expect below normal precipitation for majority of the state to be favored, except for the far northeast part of the state. They're going to have equal chances. But pretty strong confidence that we'll have at least equal chances of temperature being above or below, and then below normal precipitation is to be a guarantee. And I really think with as much cold air as we have right now and the kind of pattern we're setting up in, that below normal temperatures will probably end up being the result of this winter.
Sure. Well, Chip, this is our last weather update for 2022, believe it or not. So thanks for all that you've contributed this year.
Yeah, I enjoyed being a part of the program and talking to you and getting out to the listeners. And I look forward to continuing that in 2023.
Yep, here's hoping for some more optimistic outlooks in the year ahead. Once again, that was K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond joining us for this week's Agricultural Weather Report. We'll be back with more next week on Agriculture Today.